Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the executive budget briefing. My name is Becky Freeman. I am the director of Southern Arizona for Governor Ducey, and we are excited to be back here at Pima Community College. Thank you to the Chancellor for hosting us again. This is the fourth year in a row that we have taken the Budget Roadshow throughout the state. And this is actually the first presentation, and we'll go later today to Nogales. But thank you so much for having us. I will turn it over to Matt Gress, the director of OSPB, and his team. But thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions, they'll take them at the end. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Becky, and thank you for organizing not only this presentation, but Nogales will also be in Yuma next week. We will be in Kingman, in Prescott, in Flagstaff, and in Casa Grande, sharing the good news that we've included here in the governor's 2020 budget. So myself and two other staff with the governor's Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting will be presenting to you on several key highlights of the governor's executive budget, and then we'll take questions at the end. And I'm particularly happy to be here today because there are some key investments for Pima College in this budget that we're very excited about. And yes, yeah, I'm sure you're excited about it as well, it sounds like. So we will move ahead here. The governor was reelected with 1.3 million Arizonans, 56% of the votes cast. And they made two priorities abundantly clear to him. They want their teachers paid and their budgets balanced, and this executive budget does both. Over the next hour or so, we'll give you a snapshot of our view of the national and state economies, as well as their impact on our general fund revenues. Then we'll talk about some current year supplemental funding initiatives, and then move into the 2020 budget overview, where you'll see some of the items related to Pima College. So from the economic perspective, on the national stage, things are looking as good as ever right now. As you can see, the blue curve right there represents quarterly readings of United States gross domestic product growth. And we're expecting for calendar year 2018, once all of the data is finalized, to see a 3% year-over-year growth in 2018 over 2017. We haven't seen that kind of growth rate since before the Great Recession. Now, a good deal of that growth in 2018 was driven by business fixed investment. These are the new factories or factory expansions, those one-time, long-term investments, fueled in part by federal tax reform, as well as by an optimistic consumer. We're looking at 15-year highs in consumer sentiment, both on the individual level as well as the business side. And then we have a healthy labor market, of course, and that's what the red curve represents. We're approaching 50-year lows in terms of U.S. unemployment. And so that is really supporting the growth in demand for production by these private businesses, and that looks good. Now, we do believe that there are some clouds on the horizon that we need to be aware of. This shows you the stock market, the S&P 500, and everyone has heard in the media this historic climb at the highest levels ever of the S&P 500. And then you can see throughout 2018 it was a really bumpy year. In fact, we ended a little lower than what we began the year in 2018. And that is affected by a number of policies. For instance, the 4 Federal Reserve Board rate hikes that occurred in the last calendar year, the most rate hikes since before the Great Recession, somewhat spooked investors in our view and added more volatility. We have trade tensions, among other concerns. So the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, has acknowledged that. And that really has sent a shockwave of confidence back into the market, and you've probably seen media reports that things are looking up. But it's really unwise to track the day-to-day of the stock market. I'm sure if you have your index funds or your retirement accounts and you're looking and you're like, oh, wow, I'm down today. And tomorrow you wake up and, oh, I'm up again. You know, that's not really a healthy way to live our lives, because either our hair would be on fire or would be popping open a bottle of champagne, you know, each day that comes your way. But there is a trend that we've seen that went up and then we saw a sharp decline, and that's something that we have to keep in mind. And of course, some of the other outlooks that the Federal Reserve Board puts together, the national unemployment rate, still low, but they have raised the unemployment rate slightly higher based on November data compared to September, as well as the gross domestic product, the indicator that I mentioned earlier about the rate of growth of our economy. Still growing, but at a slightly slower pace. But despite all of that, we've still had a pretty good run on the national stage, and Arizona has been leading. We ranked first in construction job growth, second in manufacturing job growth. Those are two key base industries in Arizona that give us a sense of the near-term job prospects and overall economic activity in Arizona. We ranked third in net immigration. As the governor always likes to say, people are voting with their feet, and they're moving to Arizona to find opportunity. And when they get here, they're going to find a job. We have more jobs in Arizona than people to fill them. And in fact, for the fourth month in a row, Arizona's monthly job growth, year-over-year job growth in each month has been in excess of 3%. And we received some preliminary data last week that indicates we're adding another month on. So a streak of 5 months, 3% job growth here in the state of Arizona. Again, a streak we have not seen since before the Great Recession. So that gives us confidence, and this continues the labor narrative. The red curve represents that 3% year-over-year growth, 5 months running. We've been able to see sustained total employment at all-time highs in the history of our state. The blue curve represents unemployment, and you can see in 2017 and 2018 it begins to flatten out. But we think that's a good thing because it's driven in part by people who were not in the labor force, seeing their job prospects go up, and now they're reentering, and so that affects the overall unemployment rate. But we do have some economists here in Arizona that say that they expect that unemployment rate to drop to as low as 3% or even in the high 2% range by the end of this calendar year. So we'll see if that pans out, but it certainly is positive news when we are trying to put together a budget. And our revenues for the general fund, they're up. So the blue bar represents what we thought we would bring in as a state when we passed the current year budget last May. The red bars represent what actually happened. So through November, because those are the months that we have final revenue data on, we're up $175 million. So not only are we going to reach our revenue forecast for this current fiscal year, but we're probably going to exceed it. And as a result, the executive has raised their revenue forecast for this year, as well as our legislative budget forecasters. So we're in agreement there. So in fiscal year 2018, this shows the year-over-year growth in general fund revenues. If you look at the 10-year average, it's about 3.2%, 3.2% growth. In fiscal year 18, we had 7.1% year-over-year growth. It was phenomenal, and it's helped build a very healthy cash balance that I'll talk about in just a second. We're expecting to see the same kind of healthy growth in this year. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to revise our revenue forecast up because we're $175 million ahead. So that's a 6.8% growth rate in 2019. But we want to be cautious about moving forward. We don't want to make ongoing spending commitments in the out years when there is concern about on the stock market level in Wall Street. There are a lot of other tensions, and we have a 10-year average of revenue growth of 3.2%. Reversion to the mean is real for those of you who work in math and stats. So we really moderated our growth rates in the out years, which provides, I think, some more flexibility and caution into our forecast as we move ahead. So this is a really interesting chart. The red curve up above shows how much we are spending, how much we have in spending commitments for the state. The blue curve represents how much revenue is available. Now, if you look at fiscal year 2009, or the beginning of those lines, if you can't see the years, there's an obvious problem. We have more spending commitments than we have revenue, to the tune of $3 billion in the midst of the Great Recession. I'm sure many of you felt that when the state made cuts to community college budgets, among many others. K-12 took a huge hit. We froze many of our health care programs, our social safety net programs, to deal with it. And we also mortgaged our state capitol building. You may have seen that on the Daily Show a few years ago. But in any case, we've worked over that time to right the fiscal ship. And in 2017, the blue line went above the red line, and we had a structural balance, a positive structural balance for the first time since the Great Recession. Now, the table at the bottom shows you kind of where things stand. Before we talk about executive initiatives, including things that we have planned for Pima College, in fiscal year 2020, we are expecting a cash balance in our in the state's account of $1.1 billion. When the governor took office in 2015, we were facing a projected $1 billion deficit, and now we're looking at a $1 billion surplus. So that is good news for the state of Arizona, and it allows us to make those investments that everyone has been long awaiting. We also maintain structural balance. Again, we have more revenues coming in than the spending commitments we make, which is incredibly important when we determine what investments we have in the budget moving ahead. And the governor has said that every budget I will introduce, it must be balanced. So this is where we start. Now, in making sure that we can keep everything on track from a fiscal sense, we can't repeat the mistakes of the past. We saw the 6 and the 7% revenue gains in the mid-2000s. In fact, it went up to 20% in one year. And spending tracked along with those revenues. Between 1982 and 2002, our spending growth was relatively stable at about 3.5 to 4% a year. You can see in the mid-2000s the explosive rates of growth year over year. In fiscal year 2006, we had 20% growth in spending over the prior year, and most of that was ongoing. And we know what happened. We know how the story ended. The revenues dried up, $3 billion in the hole, and we had to make massive cuts, and it affected a lot of stakeholders, and they were painful. Since the governor has taken office and the budgets he's proposed and signed, you've seen the growth rate in 16, 17, and 18 being relatively tame, below that long-run spending growth average. In fiscal year 19, it jumped up to 6.4%, fueled in large part by the 20 by 2020 teacher pay raise plan to provide a 20% raise to teachers by school year 2020, as well as the restoration of key parts of the K-12 funding formula that were suspended during the Great Recession. In fiscal year 20, we're going up to 9.2%. But again, most of that is one time, which provides us some flexibility in the out years if an economic downturn occurs. So we have a long-run average of 4.5%, slightly higher, or a 5-year average of 4.5%, slightly higher than the long-run average. But in the out years, in 21 and 22, we roll back some of our spending, and we'll take a look at our commitments in 21 and 22 when we get there. So one of the key ways that we're going to prepare for the future is by saving a good chunk of that $1 billion surplus. We know that we're not saving enough. And Moody's, S&P, other credit rating agencies, Pew came to the state capitol last week and said that we don't have enough money to weather a downturn. They suggest between 10 and 15% that we should have in our savings account. We have about a little over 5%. So that's a problem. In fact, right now, we probably could weather 3 out of the 10 recession scenarios for 6 years. And 6 years is the length that Pew says it will take to recover from a revenue perspective. So what the governor does is puts in the single largest general fund deposit into our rainy day fund in the rainy day fund's history, $542 million. You can see these blue bars represent the cash in the rainy day fund since 1991 when it was established. So we're bringing the balance up to $1 billion in savings. And Pew says that that will help prepare us for 7 out of the 10 recession scenarios for a 6-year period. So it moves us in the right direction, and it helps protect key investments that we're making, particularly when it comes to teacher pay and other K-12 spending. This is something that the governor announced in his State of the State address, regaining ownership of the state capitol. In 2010, we took out $1 billion in debt for 1 year to make it through 1 year. So we took out debt to operate state government and keep the lights on. We cut $1 billion. We took debt out for $1 billion and mortgaged our state capitol and some other buildings. And then we did a temporary sales tax hike for another $1 billion to solve it. So after 10 years, we can call that debt or refinance that debt because we paid down about $500 million. And we're able to remove some of these state buildings that we put up as collateral because we paid down a good chunk of the principal. We're refinancing the remaining $950 million that's on the books, and we're refinancing it at lower interest rates, smaller principal, and a stronger credit rating that the state has been able to achieve over the last decade, which is going to save Arizona taxpayers over $100 million between 2020 and 2030. So we think that's a really big win for state government and for the state of Arizona. Some supplemental funding that I wanted to point out. We're going to close out the year with $55 million. I'll just briefly address 2 key efforts. One is the School Facilities Board. This is the state agency that awards money to schools either to repair HVAC systems or roofs or other building components, or they award money to build new schools if a school qualifies. We've had a number of applications come in for repairs that has been much higher than in prior years, so we need to address that. And then the other point I wanted to mention is the agriculture infrastructure. Water is one of the key priorities of the governor. You may have heard in the news of the drought contingency plan. This is an effort of 7 lower basin Colorado River states, Mexico and the federal government trying to figure out how we can conserve water in Arizona and protect the water levels in Lake Mead from going down further. We need more time to prepare for that drier future that Arizona will face. And so this is going to provide $5 million for agriculture infrastructure in the state. My understanding, it will be predominantly in southern Arizona, southern central Arizona, for building wells and other pumping equipment to use some of the groundwater instead of taking that from Lake Mead. So moving into 2020 budget priorities, you recall I mentioned we had a projected $1 billion surplus. We're taking half of that and putting it into the rainy day fund, and we're allocating the other half for executive initiatives, of which a majority will be one time. If you were to look at the spending at a glance, there's a difference in budget world of initiatives, which are new spending programs that are not necessarily included in the baseline. And the baseline is we expect funding to be there at that level year after year after year. So just looking at executive initiatives, you can see that roughly half of the new spending in 2020 will go to education, K-12 and higher education. If you consider baseline, this is formula growth, new students coming into the K-12 system, inflation, and the 20 by 2020 teacher pay, which is in the base and is expected to be carried out over the next several years. We're spending 63% of new 2020 increases on K-12 education, and then another 7% on higher education. So 70% of the new spending in fiscal year 2020 will be dedicated to education, and that is something that we were very proud of, and it's something that Arizonans have demanded that we include in the budget. So where does that end us? And we'll talk about some of the executive initiatives in detail, but high-level overview, we're able to make key investments while maintaining positive cash and structural balances. And you can see we had the $1 billion surplus in cash in 2020. We're ending at $109 million in that table below. with a positive structural balance of $244 million. It means that we have $244 million in ongoing revenues beyond ongoing spending. The blue bar represents ongoing spending, the solid blue bar. The solid red bar represents, I'm sorry, I got those backwards. The solid blue bar represents ongoing revenues. The solid red bar represents ongoing spending. The goal here is to make sure that the blue bar is above the red bar throughout the entire forecast. And then the striped bars represent one-time revenues versus one-time spending. And we want to be very clear. We never produce a budget that uses one-time revenues to cover ongoing spending. The math obviously doesn't work out, and that one-time money won't be there in the next year when you need to make that ongoing payment. So we keep the budget balanced throughout the entire 3-year budget window and keep a good chunk of cash on hand. So with that, I'm going to introduce Seth Walter, who will talk about some of the Government That Works sections, some really cool initiatives that we're doing. So without further ado, Seth.
All right. Thanks, Matt. We try to mix it up so you guys don't have to listen to Matt the whole time. So here we are. So our first sort of goal here is to lay out how government is going to sort of be seen new in the lives of Arizonans. And so our first priority here is transportation as well. We use money that we have gained from the public safety fee, which has now permanently removed this diversion of funds that used to be going to or should be going to transportation infrastructure project. We have been in the past spending that money to support the highway patrol. With the public safety fee, we've been able to remove that diversion and allow the money to be used on infrastructure projects that everyday Arizonans need and want. And the biggest one of that is the I-17 expansion north of Phoenix towards Flagstaff. Right now, there is an ongoing project to expand this roadway to 3 lanes. However, we don't have enough money. The State Board of Transportation doesn't have enough money to complete the project. Doesn't mean that it wouldn't be done in the future. It just means that it's not going to be done sort of in the current program of building. So what this budget has been able to do is use that money that we have now saved from the public safety fee, put it directly to work right now towards expanding this, making it 3 lanes all the way from Anthem to Sunset Point. And on this chart, you can see the sort of blue lines are what's already been programmed and funded by the State Board of Transportation, $193 million there. And then the orange bars are what we are committing in this budget to expanding and completing this project ahead of schedule. And so collectively, over the next 3 fiscal years, that's $130 million to make this project sort of happen. And it's looking like that shovels will be in the ground before this calendar year is over. So end of 2019, they're going to be working on expanding these roads and making this a safer, more efficient, keeping the economy moving in that area. So the next project that we use the same money for, again, the rest of the money that was freed up from this public safety fee, is to fully fund preventative road maintenance in the state for the first time in a long time. This finishes the project that we started last year where we dedicated more money to preventative road maintenance. We brought it up from 29% of need to 79% of need. We complete that project this year. We are now funding preventative road maintenance at 100%. And this just makes good sense because a dollar that we spend on maintaining a good road will save $6 in construction costs for rebuilding crumbling infrastructure. So this is just really smart, and it's going to make, solve those pothole problems that we all hate so much. So another really great use of funding in this budget. Additionally, we recognize that it's not just roads that are the infrastructure of the future. We really have been working for several years now on increasing broadband connection, and I think rural Arizonans will know this more than the rest of us. Any of them trying to stream this online right now would know the struggles of having good quality high-speed internet across the state. And so this budget dedicates money to solving just that problem. 825,000 Arizonans, according to federal data, don't have access to high-speed internet, and this budget helps bridge that gap, building that needed infrastructure. Also, and we don't just stop at high-speed internet. We're thinking of the future. We're thinking of the next step. And businesses across the state, businesses across the country are needing super fast gigabit internet. And we're not forgetting about that. Right now, only 10.6% of Arizonans have access to this, sort of for the economy of the future, and we're pushing to make that happen. So you can see on the slide here the money that we're dedicating towards these projects, $6 million in ongoing funding and $1 million in one-time funding for grants that help build these infrastructure projects across the state, as well as $3 million to create an Arizona Competes Fund grant program for rural broadband development. Another piece that we're doing is using already existing money at the Commerce Authority to create a statewide broadband director. So someone to coordinate these projects and make sure that all of these different entities are sort of building a single usable system for the Arizonans. Another great project or great initiative in this budget, especially for the, Pima County, is that we're starting to deal with some of the lasting issues of the Great Recession, where we shifted a lot of funding, a lot of project spending from the state government to the counties. And particularly with the Department of Juvenile Corrections, we did a county cost-sharing program where the counties had to take on a good portion of the expenditures necessary to house and rehabilitate our juvenile in the juvenile correction system. We pulled some numbers for Pima County here. And over the last few years, Pima County has been responsible for $1.7 million in cost sharing for the DJC program, which represents about 15.3% of their total budget, despite the fact that Pima County only contributed about 5% of juveniles to the program. So for Pima County, this wasn't necessarily the most equitable treatment, and we've been able to correct that by moving that by getting rid of that whole system, changing the laws, taking that money back to the state level where it belongs. And then finally, for the Government That Works section is our friends down in Nogales. We're dedicating $700,000 to building the cold storage facility at the Mariposa Port. Arizona, as you can see from the chart, we used to be #1 in the amount of trade that came through this port. That has dropped off in the past few years, mostly because Texas has invested money in these cold storage facilities. It's things for like berries and vegetables and even some pharmaceuticals that as they're transported, while they're being inspected, they need to be refrigerated. Or they're going to spoil. And if that spoilage happens, obviously you're not going to send your goods through that port. We lose business to other states. So this is a really great program. $300,000 is being matched by local partners to sort of complete this and really push Arizona back up to the leading edge of trade in this international sphere. So that concludes the Government That Works section. Matt's going to come back up and talk about education, which I know that you guys are very excited about. Thanks.
Thanks, Seth. So education is continuing to be the #1 priority of the governor, and we're putting $637 million, new dollars, going into our K-12 system. We'll talk about a number of these. Teacher pay, $165 million, enrollment growth for $147 million. New school construction, and this is a really neat policy change that we're making that I'll talk about. Additional assistance for $68 million. This is part of the commitment to rolling back recessionary cuts. Results-based funding for $60 million, a $60 million increase. Building renewal grants from the School Facilities Board. A school safety package for $16 million that I'll mention. A CTE incentive program. This is career and technical education that I know Pima College is very good at and works closely with our joint technical education districts. And then some other targeted investments. $104 million in new higher education investments. Some of these are more technical in nature, but $21 million for the Teachers Academy. That will have an impact here at Pima College. The Pima Aviation Center expansion, I had a chance to go and visit that, an impressive facility, and the demand is there. The aerospace industry here in southern Arizona is very excited about this. And then we're including $6 million for your neighbors up north in Maricopa County for expanding their healthcare course offerings. So we're delivering on the promise for raising teacher pay and restoring those recession-era cuts. This year, we're including $233 million to honor those commitments. $165 million for the next 5% increment for the teacher pay raise to get to 20% by fiscal year 2021, which is school year 2020. And then we're including additional assistance, $68 million this year, with a goal of by 2023 to have a full $372 million restored in that formula program. Additional assistance covers things like textbooks, technology, school buses, and it can cover operations, support staff salary increases, as well as faculty increases. So we're really excited about that. All told, once implemented, $1 billion will be going into K-12 education for these initiatives. We're closing the achievement gap by expanding our results-based funding program. This began in 2018 with the goal of expanding and replicating successful practices and programs in our K-12 school system. In 2018 and 2019, we used performance on the AZ merit to distribute that money. The top 10% of scorers would qualify, and if you're a school site in that category that serves a student population qualifying for free and reduced price lunches at 60% or higher, then the state would give you a $400 per pupil award. If you are below the 60% threshold, the school would receive a $225 award. So you can see in 2018 and 2019, we distributed around $40 million each year. About 300 school sites qualified. But we always had the intention of moving to the letter grade. The State Board of Education established this letter grade ranking. You may have heard and seen banners that my school's an A school or my school's a B school. Well, it's based on a formula that not only takes into account achievement on the AZ merit or the menu of assessments that a school may provide, but it recognizes growth. It recognizes where a student starts and where a student ends, because that's a really important indicator. Kids begin in different places. I'm a former school teacher, and you had to address each student's situation and meet them where they are. And so we wanted to give credit for the growth in a student's performance, as well as attendance rates, graduation rates, all of these indicators that we know lead to academic success for our kids. So we moved to the letter grade system, and all A's will qualify for results-based funding. So that's a total of 454 A schools in 2020 will receive either the $400 or $225 per pupil amount. But we went a step further, and we said we want to add B schools that serve high-need populations. So if a school receives a ranking of B and they have a student population with 60% or more qualifying for the free or reduced price lunch program, they're going to receive a results-based funding allocation as well for $225 per pupil to recognize their excellence and the hard work it takes to earn that letter grade. The school safety plan includes two components in the budget, $9 million to fully fund our school resource officer program. And this is based on what the schools have asked us to provide. You can see the funding cycles over the last three, where we have more schools applying for school resource officers. These are the cops on campus, the partnerships that schools have with local law enforcement agencies to bring them onto the campus to perform a number of duties, mentorship, providing training to parents about certain challenges and issues that kids are facing these days in order to keep kids out of trouble. But we've always had more demand than we've had supply. And in the current fiscal cycle, 89 SROs were asked for but went unfunded. So we fully fund that wait list. And we ask ADE to move up the date for application for the new round of SROs beginning in fiscal year 2021. We're asking them to do that this summer so that we have a sense of the demand so that we can fund that in next year's budget. We also recognize the important role that mental health plays in school safety in a safe learning environment. Last year, we included $10 million in our Medicaid program to provide behavioral health counselors and dispatch them to schools that have higher needs based on income. This year, we're including a new school counselor or social worker program. This is a grant program, $6 million in year one, and we double that to $12 million in year two, so that schools who need a school counselor or a social worker can apply to the Department of Education, similar to how they apply for our school resource officers, and get a counselor. Now, this isn't going to fund counselors in every school throughout the state, but it really is an important start, and it'll add 224 counselors if that's what everyone selects. They could select a social worker, and that would increase the number of positions that are funded. But for counselors, if everyone chooses one, 224 counselors over the next 2 years. I think that's a really good start. The CTE incentive program, we're providing $10 million ongoing to award high schools that have graduates who attain an improved industry certification. The Arizona Commerce Authority, our business development public-private agency in the state, does forecasting every year, and I'm sure PEMA does it as well, and probably you provide data to the Commerce Authority, where you're trying to determine where is Tucson, where is Southern Arizona going in terms of the economy and the workforce, so that we can have classes prepared and ready for students to get the skills they need and then have a job waiting for them upon graduation. So we're providing a $1,000 incentive payment for those high school graduates who earn that industry certification, so that they're ready to stay here in Arizona and find a job that's in high demand. Our charter school package, we have over 500 charter schools in the state, and they're regulated by the Board for Charter Schools. And about 17% of Arizona students attend a charter school. That's been growing for a number of years and is continuing to grow quite rapidly. But we haven't provided enough oversight staff in that department to keep up with the overall growth in the system. So we're including 10 additional staff that will allow more inspections to be performed on site and allow the board to implement the new financial framework that it's currently finalizing, which will allow the state to identify financial problems in a charter school earlier on and help them find corrective actions so that they can shore up their own finances. This is the building renewal grant application for our district schools, again, replacing those HVACs or those roofs. You can see the applications that districts have submitted since 2013. It's more than tripled. And that's in part because we did a lot of building back in the mid-2000s. We did a lot of deficiency corrections as part of a lawsuit that occurred in the late 90s. And so those roofs and those HVAC systems, they're reaching the end of their useful life and need to be replaced. So we're really not surprised by this, but we do need to take care of it and fully fund it. And that's essentially what this chart says. So I'll skip over it. This is a very important policy change that the governor is including. Beginning in 2013, we changed the law that said a school district will qualify for a new school building if its enrollment reaches capacity in the current year, which means the kids all have to show up, exceed capacity, and then you'll get a new building, which takes about 2 years to build. Well, where do you house the kids? So you have to put them in modular buildings, in classrooms that are not ideal for the instruction going on in those courses, and it really has created a very operational challenge. And what has also happened as a result of this, schools are busting at the seams. They want to get these new schools built as quickly as possible, so they end up paying our construction companies a premium to accelerate that construction. In fact, we have one district that had 2 construction companies on the site at the same time to get the buildings built as quickly as possible. So what we're including in our budget is a return to the pre-2013 standard, which says that if you're an elementary school and you have a projected enrollment that will exceed your capacity in the next 2 years, then you qualify for a new school building. If you're a middle or high school, that's 3 years, so that we have enough time to plan, design, and build the schools so that they're ready when the students show up. So this is a really important shift, And you can see the school districts affected. Now, the shading isn't as evident on the screen, but Chandler, Douglas, Maricopa, Pima, Safford, and Somerton are schools that would qualify in the, under the current law. So they're already at capacity, and they would get new schools. But we're also adding in Vail, Levine, Vail, Yuma Union, and Sahuarita. Those schools would now qualify this year under our proposal. So it's being proactive, it's being forward-looking, it's providing these facilities that Arizona children deserve, and we're really happy to move forward with this program. The Teachers Academy, responding to one of our largest workforce crises in a generation. We know that the number of students going through colleges of education is declining. We know that the number of teachers right now in Arizona public schools who are eligible for retirement, it's going up. So we have to keep pace with replacing those who are retiring, but we also have to keep pace with student growth so that our class sizes don't get out of control, which we already have a 1 to 23 teacher to student ratio right now. The national average is 1 to 15. So just to keep 1 to 23, we're going to have to do a lot of work, and we need all hands on deck. So we are expanding the Arizona Teachers Academy, $21 million ongoing. Expanded eligibility, all 4 years of a student's education at a university, if they're attending a college of education, is covered, net of any institutional aid. So after they apply scholarships, federal aid, need or merit-based aid at that institution, and there still is money that needs to be covered, the state will come in and pick up that tab. We're also expanding this to juniors and seniors who are not in the College of Education, but are pursuing a degree in science, technology, engineering, and math. And they agree to teach, we'll allow them to join the Teachers Academy. And the idea behind this is for every year that you receive Teachers Academy support, you agree to teach a year in a public Arizona classroom. So it's really a mutual partnership here with the student, the aspiring teacher, as well as what we need in our state. We also provide a $1,000 stipend for students who agree to teach in high-need areas, such as our rural schools, our low-income schools, tribal schools, special education, or STEM-related coursework. And this is really, I think, a very important part of this. We're allowing non-resident students, and we're extending funding to our post-baccalaureate programs here in Pima and in Maricopa, because we know that that is so fundamental. Many of those, I was just speaking with the dean of the program here in Pima, many of those folks who are in the post-bac program at Pima, they're already in the classroom. And so they would qualify for that last dollar benefit, and if they're in a critical need area, they're going to qualify for the $1,000 stipend. So we want to recognize the important work that the community colleges are doing to help address the teacher crisis, and we hope that that program just expands like crazy. We want to come back next year. I mentioned at the outset we have all this supplemental funding to take care of current year needs. I hope we're coming back here with doubling this program because we are at capacity. Now, we project that this will open up close to 5,000 seats in the Teachers Academy. Right now, there are 238 individuals participating in the Teachers Academy. So we're going all in on this investment, and we need all hands on deck. So we're really excited about it. Our targeted workforce investments, as you know, $20 million to double the capacity of the Aviation Technology Center at Pima Community College. So, yes. I was very pleased to be invited to come out and take a look at the fantastic work that Pima is doing, not only in this space, but in other key workforce areas. And what I really like about what Pima College is doing is that you're not just relying on the state. I mean, you are really bringing together all sorts of partners, your private partners, your local community, businesses, and the state. Everyone's coming together to meet the needs of Southern Arizona, and this is a testament to your work in that area. And we know that Southern Arizona is an aerospace hub, and it's going to continue to expand, and we need to foster that by having investments like this. The $6 million that I mentioned earlier for Maricopa Community College, they already have the facilities built for these expanded course offerings in healthcare, but they need the equipment. And I'm sure Pima is going through the same thing, this simulation-driven training, where there's a shortage in clinical training opportunities. And so the more clinical experience that they can get through these simulation environments, the faster they can get through the clinical stage, and the faster they can get into the workforce and meet the growing needs of the Arizona healthcare industry. We're investing, again, some funding in our public universities, some flexible funding that we've included there, and our National Guard tuition program. And I wanted to make it very clear by creating this exaggerated chart, but it's quite poignant that we are the only state in the country that does not have a tuition benefit for our National Guard members to go to public universities or to community colleges. So we're including $1 million for that. We proposed it last year, didn't make it into the final budget, but we're coming back and we're hoping that we can get it through because it can help with retention and force of strength for our National Guard. And with that, I'm going to introduce Marshall Pimentel to discuss the health and welfare section of the executive budget.
Thank you, Matt. I'll just jump right in. The executive budget includes $2 million in fiscal year 20 and $9 million in fiscal year 21 to eliminate the KidsCare enrollment freeze. KidsCare is Arizona's Medicaid program that provides health insurance to over 32,000 Arizona children, and the federal government currently covers 100% of the cost of the program. However, by the end of September, that match will drop to 90%. And while that's not a drastic drop, in 2017, there was a law that was passed that says that KidsCare enrollment will freeze if the federal match drops below 100%. Therefore, without the repeal of this, approximately 25,700 children could lose coverage by fiscal year 22, as shown by the blue line on the graph. Without KidsCare, families may choose to forego medical coverage for their children or reduce their working hours or stop working altogether in order to qualify for Medicaid, which is an outcome that nobody wants. Therefore, eliminating this freeze will allow parents to remain in the workforce and pursue opportunities that can free them from the need for government assistance. In addition to securing health care for Arizona's children, the executive budget also dedicates $56 million in federal funding to Arizona's Child Care Subsidy Program. This program, which is operated by the Department of Economic Security, provides child care subsidies for low-income and foster parents. Right now, Arizona's rates are among the lowest in the country, providing an average reimbursement rate of $365 per month to low-income parents and $406 per month to foster parents. And therefore, parents have to make up the difference between the subsidy and the actual cost of care, which can be difficult for parents, especially that are working low-wage jobs. Therefore, half of this funding will be dedicated to increasing the subsidy rate to $775 from $576 as it currently stands, and that will put us in line with our neighbors' maximum rates. The executive budget then allocates the other half of the funding to expand the program to include 5,000 additional children who are currently on the wait list. And while we're helping Arizona's children, we can't forget Arizona's senior population. The executive budget allocates $11 million in federal funding for adult protective services and home and community-based services. Adult protective services provides case management for adults who are suffering from abuse. In recent years, reports of abuse and neglect have risen by 18% on average annually. In fiscal year 2019, the executive used federal support to include more staff to meet caseload demands, and in fiscal year 2020, the executive budget continues to provide money to accommodate caseload growth. In addition, the executive allocates new federal funding to address the backlog of individuals in need of home and community-based services, which include adult daycare, home-delivered meals, transportation, and nursing home visits. The wait list continues to grow in Maricopa County, with 1,270 seniors on the wait list at the end of fiscal year 2017. As shown by the blue line on the graph, and statewide, the wait list is estimated to have 3,200 seniors waiting for these services. Therefore, this commitment ensures that Arizona's seniors are safe from abuse and are able to stay in their homes and live independently for as long as possible. In 2018, the March of Dimes found that several areas throughout Arizona have a concerning lack of prenatal care resources, especially in the state's rural areas. This puts women and their unborn children at higher risk for complications during pregnancy and after birth. And in order to better care for this vulnerable population, the executive recommends $1 million in funding for telemedicine equipment to better serve expectant mothers. This funding will also be used to provide loan repayment assistance to those healthcare professionals which provide this vital service. And finally, as you can see from this graph, veteran suicides in Arizona make up a larger portion of total suicides in our state when compared to our neighbors and national rates. As this is a concern nationwide, the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention Act was passed by the federal Congress in 2015, which directed the VA to improve mental health service access to veterans. This manifested in Arizona's Be Connected program, which provides a 24/7 support call line, a resource matching tool, and training for community members who want to assist veterans in need. Last year, over 2,000 individuals were served by Be Connected program providers, and this $1 million in funding will ensure that this critical program continues to benefit Arizona's active military personnel, veterans, and their families. And to finish out the presentation, we'll invite Matt back to the podium.
A little coffee break in between. So our natural resources, the chief component of this is the drought contingency plan. As I mentioned earlier, $5 million in agriculture infrastructure in the current fiscal year, and then we're including $30 million in 2020. And this is going to be used as a payment to those who are legally entitled to the Colorado River water to keep that water in Lake Mead. We're already seeing this blue line is a projection on the elevation levels in Lake Mead. Once you get to a certain level, it's close to a little below 1,000 feet at Lake Mead, you won't have enough water to get through Hoover Dam, which affects the flow of the Colorado River, obviously, and hydroelectric power throughout Arizona and the Southwest. So the idea here is to give us enough lead time to prepare for that drier future, and you can see what the drought contingency plan would mean. Now, the $30 million investment is not the only investment. We have a number of other local partners, Central Arizona Project, as well as the federal government and tribes putting in money, but this is a key state investment. And the idea is, with that red curve, to try to keep the elevation above the Tier 3 high-risk zone. So the projections look bleak, but they are even bleaker without having a drought contingency plan in place. So we need a glide path, and I think we've been very successful with the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. We're actually using less water today than we were when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president, as a result of very aggressive conservation oriented policies. So we need to take another bold step. We have until January 31st to ratify the drought contingency plan. The legislature has to vote to approve that. And so we're working very vigorously with those stakeholders to get a plan in place as quickly as possible. For our public safety, we're including a $74 million pay package for them. We recognize that retention and recruitment of key public safety personnel has been a growing problem. The Department of Corrections and the Department of Public Safety will be the chief beneficiaries, and you can see the ranges of salary increases throughout the agencies. The other agencies that qualify either have AZ Post certified, so they are qualified, they're sworn officers, or in the case of our Department of Child Safety or the Department of Health Services, they're serving critical public safety roles, a child welfare case aide, or in the case of health services, our nurses, behavioral health aides, and security who work at our Arizona State Hospital. So vacancy rates in our Department of Corrections, they are approaching dangerously high levels. In 2011, we had about a 1% vacancy rate, as evidenced by The blue curve represents the authorized positions. The red curve represents filled. In 2018, that percentage has grown to 14.3%. Once you approach 20%, the environment in the prison becomes incredibly dangerous, and you have staff working overtime. What has also happened is that our staff that should be working on recidivism work, counseling, drug treatment, and educational services, et cetera, we're pulling them from those posts to work security because of this high vacancy. So it's a very crucial problem, and we're including a 10% raise in year one with another 5% raise in year two. The attracting troopers is a really big problem, and you can see where DPS's entry-level pay is about $47,000 relative to the other larger law enforcement employers. And I have heard in Southern Arizona double-digit increases that may be on the table for some of the law enforcement agencies. We don't know what the full impact of that will be, but what we're trying to do is stem the tide to get more folks into the door. Universally, it's really difficult to recruit police personnel right now, and pay is one of those ways we can try to address it. Reducing turnover at the Department of Juvenile Corrections. This is a staggering statistic. In the last fiscal year, the turnover rate of entry-level youth correctional officers, 100%. 100% of all of our entry-level youth correctional officers turned over. You cannot successfully rehabilitate troubled youth when they have a different YCO every week. It is just not going to be successful. So we need to, we're including a 15% pay raise for these correctional officers, A, because of these staggering rates of turnover, B, because we're giving a similar increase to the Department of Corrections. And what we're also allowing them to do is implement an 8-year step plan within their own existing budget to promote longevity. We're including a 9% raise for child safety workers, 35% turnover in that post. And we know that for every additional caseworker that a child in state care has, the likelihood of them finding permanency declines dramatically. So that's based on national research. The more continuity you can have with a child facing such adverse circumstances, the better it will be for that child's outcome. We know that pay is the second biggest reason. The first is not feeling valued or recognized, and I'm sure you imagine that that has something to do with pay. So certainly a major issue. And then we've had a legislative benchmark of having 1,400 case-carrying caseworkers, and we've been unable to reach that benchmark, and we think that this pay plan will help. These are the recidivism reduction initiatives in our prisons. Substance abuse treatment and educational services are two key pathways to better rehabilitate inmates and have them re-enter society and truly get that second chance. But right now, the substance abuse counselor vacancy rate's 50%. Half of the positions we have for this go unfilled, and the other half are having to do some kind of security work because of the vacancy rate in our security officers. Correctional education teachers face similar pressures, and so we're including pay raises for them. This is our second chance commitment. These are our employment centers that help provide job training. The Pima College actually provides training with our prison facility here in Tucson, the construction trades primarily, but getting them ready to reenter and be successful contributing members of our society. So far, 2,000 inmates have gone through the employment center, and roughly half are employed right now. And we're wanting to use internal resources to expand a new prison coding program to recognize the growth in IT here in Arizona and try to take advantage of 21st century employment opportunities. We're including some other targeted investments for public safety, $6 million for the Loop 202. This is the South Mountain Freeway in Maricopa County that's opening at the end of the year. We need patrols for that. $3 million for our Border Strike Force trooper coverage. This would be in the Tucson area and in the border counties, the other border counties. So we're adding 12 more troopers there. The goal is to have 24/7 trooper coverage throughout southern Arizona. $2 million to continue adding in more troopers at nighttime in Maricopa County to catch impaired or wrong way driving. And then finally, $1 million for DPS vehicle replacement. This is the public safety fee that Seth mentioned earlier. Right now it's $32. It's calculated by taking the highway patrol budget and dividing it by the number of eligible vehicles. ATVs and golf carts, street legal golf carts that register, they pay a $5 fee because they're likely not going to be on I-10 or I-19 anytime soon. So after we account for their fee revenue, our total revenue target's $184 million. We divide that by the number of eligible transactions, and that's how you get the $32 fee. We do not want to see that fee go up. And that's why I mentioned these public safety investments. We have to balance. We have an interest of keeping the fee from going up. We also have an interest in providing increased funding for public safety, for raises, and for new troopers. And so what we tried to devise is a plan that will use the natural growth rate in public safety fee revenue as people move here. They're bringing cars. They're going to re-register them here. Or those who aren't old enough to own cars are eventually going to buy one, and they're going to register them. So there will be this natural growth rate in public safety fee revenue at that $32 level. So we include general fund support up front that then slowly gets backed off in the out years as we see the natural progression in that public safety fee. If those come in above forecast and we see public safety fee revenue grow beyond our expectations, then that would allow us to lower the public safety fee. So our interest is keeping it constant, and that's what our executive budget does. In the end, we have fiscal year 2020. You can see we're including baseline changes of $461 million, new initiatives of $538 million, for a total of about $1 billion in new spending, half of which is ongoing, or half of which is one time, and the other half is ongoing, of course. So a total spending package of $11.4 billion. We're doing a $542 million rainy day fund deposit, and we're projected to have an ending cash balance of $109 million and a structural balance of $244 million. So it's a budget that the governor set in his State of the State that takes care of the things we know are important, the things that matter: increasing funding for public safety, for child safety, for education above and beyond inflation, and for preparing Arizona for any fiscal uncertainty that might loom ahead so that we can truly recover faster, better than ever before. I want to thank Seth and Marshall for coming along with me today. We're going to have a long day ahead of us, but I have a number of staff back in Phoenix that helped put the entire $11.4 billion budget together. We went through tons of hours. I know Pima Community College received a list of questions going through this process to make sure that we can fully vet the Pima Aviation Center as well as the post-baccalaureate program. So I want to thank my staff again, and the budget is available online at azgovernor.gov as well as our agency website, azospb.gov. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm available to take questions, and I think Seth is going to have the microphone. So are there any questions out there about the budget or comments?
Amber Smith, the President and CEO for the Tucson Metro Chamber. Thank you so much for the budget and acknowledging the efforts being done on workforce development, which is an issue we are highly engaged in. I have a question on the $1,000 on technical training. What does that implementation look like, and how would that relate to JTED down here?
So how the executive envisions implementing that program is, and I think this happens on a 2-year cycle right now, where the Commerce Authority does a projection of what the workforce will look like in Arizona over the next 5 years, 5 to 7 years, and they communicate that to the CTE board within the Department of Education. And then the Department of Education sends that information to the JTED so that they're aware of, all right, does my course catalog look like it's relevant to the workforce needs in Arizona? That would be something that would continue under this program. Now they would say we identify, the 5 key areas of where Arizona's workforce is heading, and when the schools are able to certify that they have a high school graduate who has an industry certification in that area, then ADE would distribute the $1,000 to that school to either expand the program or potentially start another program that aligns with those 5 key areas. It's $10 million, and so if more than 10,000 high school graduates qualify, then it would be prorated downwards below $1,000 per student, and then we'd come back in the next budget and true that up. So we're hoping that this program starts. I know that Kansas and Wisconsin have done similar programs, but their investments were like $1.5 million or $3 million. We're going to $10 million with this investment.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question about that. The adult basic ed system is really a secondary system, right, to get high school equivalency. I'm wondering if a high school equivalency program that is working with the CTE program where the student gets their GED and a certificate at the same time, if they would qualify for that funding.
Right now, we contemplate that this is applicable only to K-12, the K-12 system. So if you are an LEA that receives funding through ADE, then you would likely qualify.
Damian Klinko, Chairman of the Pima Community College Governing Board. Director Gress, thank you so much for being here and your presentation. And thank you to the Governor's Office for the inclusion of the funding for the expansion of our aviation program and the Teachers Academy. I just wanted to underscore that the college and the Governing Board is really committed to delivering on those promises and really being on deck for these initiatives to really serve the people of Southern Arizona. So this is really a partnership, and thank you very much for the inclusion of this. And we look forward to seeing this in the final budget and these projects coming to completion. So thank you.
Thanks for those comments.
So I have one more follow-up question regarding that. Most of the high-paying CTE jobs start at JTED but require a college credential to get that industry certification. Aviation is a great example of that. They take entry-level classes through the JTED, actually at our aviation center, but through JTED, but then they have to continue through the college. Would that kind of continuum be reflected at all in the $1,000 allocation that you mentioned?
I think that's open for discussion moving forward. I think this is the start of a new program. So we're focusing primarily on K-12. We know that that the graduation rate of a high school student in a CTE program is 99% if they're in a CTE program, right? There's that strong linkage between college and career readiness, high school graduation, and having the support systems they need. We recognize the value of community colleges in that workforce dialogue, and I think that's something we'll want to continue talking about as we tweak the program moving forward.
Matt, just following up Damian, I'm David Doré, campus president. I just want to thank you for taking the time to come and actually visit our aviation center to see what we're doing. So we really appreciate that you took that time, you and your team.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's quite a phenomenal facility. If anyone hasn't been out there, I almost ran into a big engine, well, because I was just in awe of the entire facility. So that aside, I mean, it is just really a great partnership with the Tucson Airport, Davis-Monthan, and Bombardier, and many other aerospace employers in Southern Arizona.
Hi, I'm Bill Ward. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Facilities and Police for the Pima College District, and also to kind of what Damian said and Dave, we're very excited about being in the governor's budget. My question is if approved, how soon would be, I mean, I know we're already starting to look at, you guys have seen our designs, our takeoffs, that's what's got us to this place. How soon would this be able to start?
So what would likely happen with the passage of the budget, the funding becomes available, the appropriation becomes active on July 1 of this year. What would likely need to happen, though, is there would probably be, there's a joint committee on capital review. It's called JCCR. It's a legislative committee that provides additional oversight over these large dollar projects. So that review would likely have to occur where the college spells out its expenditure plan for the monies, the timeline for completion, and all of those things. And the next JCCR meeting that would occur after the budget's enacted, provided the budget gets passed in April or May. I've heard some people say it might go into the summer, but who wants to do that? But it would likely be in June, would be the next JCCR meeting. So PEMA would have to go before that committee to get review that would unlock the money that was appropriated in the 2020 budget. Oh, okay. Well, I think we have one more question.
Just a quick question. My name is Carol McQueen. I work for the Department of Corrections, but I'm here on my own time in no official capacity. Just want to make that clear. You had mentioned that that you were looking into future support staff increases in education for salary increases for the Department of Corrections as well?
Yes. We just highlighted a few key pieces. If you go online to azospb.gov, there's a section that's called the full budget, and it has all of the state agencies listed throughout state government. And you can just type in Department of Corrections, and it will list a table of the full-time equivalent, the FTE categories. So there's the security category, the education category, the substance abuse treatment category, and some other ones that show what the executive is funding and contemplates ADC to deliver. So there are a number of employee groups within that package.
Yeah, yes, there are, and there are some that have been excluded, and so I'm wondering if is there a plan in the future for including the rest of the staff that work for the department?
Well, I'm not sure which employee groups have been excluded. I know that I'd have to look at the detail book to see. I know that there were more employee groups. Not all of them were included. We had a limited amount of money, and we had to prioritize based on that, on what we see in the turnover rates and the vacancy rates, and really trying to keep it closely aligned to law enforcement, corrections. The security component of ADC is probably the most critical area of the department right now, given the vacancy rates. So we have a finite amount of resources. I know the private prisons are not included in this salary package. We've heard from them about their disappointment on that front. So budgeting is, it's not an easy exercise, and so we try to do the best we can. But the governor is open to conversations next year of people coming back and taking a second look at the enterprise outside of the raises we've included this year.
Okay, well, we've made many strides forward, so that's good news. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dolores Duran Cerda. I'm the provost here at Pima Community College. And again, I'd like to thank you, Matt and Seth and Marshall, for coming down here and working with our community and listening to our input and feedback as well, not only at Pima College, but the other places that you're going today. Also, I'd like to thank the governor for his commitment to education and to workforce development for the state of Arizona. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? Again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any more questions. There's more detail behind the budget, and this slide deck is available as well. So again, thank you for taking time out of your morning to visit with us and ask questions and learn more about what we have approved. This is the proposal. The legislature has it now, and over the next several months, they'll be going back and forth and trying to either take away stuff in what we've proposed, push back against it, or include some of their own items. So this is a proposal. It's not final, so your advocacy and attention and in conversations that you have with your legislators, if you don't know who they are, now's the time to find that out, because they will ultimately have a say on what is included in the final budget agreement. So again, thank you for coming out, and I look forward to seeing you next year.